Take those pieces of scrap metal off your chest right now. Are you planning to wear this hideous outfit to pollute my daughter's wedding? My father's heavy hand slapped hard against the front of my army dress uniform, his manicured fingers scraping violently against the combat medals I had traded half my life to earn. I stood in the shadowed hallway of the country club, my jaw locked tight as his eyes bore into me like I was a contagious disease. I'd rather tell the guests you died in a ditch somewhere than admit a freakish failure like you is my blood. He hissed, his teeth-bared spit flying onto my collar. Your place is that corner table next to the trash can by the fire exit. Go back there, shut your mouth, and don't show your face to drag this family through the mud. He spun on his heel, his expensive leather shoes clicking on the marble as he marched toward the center stage, instantly pasting a warm, fake smile on his face to greet his wealthy investors. Through the grand archway, my sister Chloe caught my eye and smirked a look of pure disgust. My chest tightened until it burned. They had no idea. They had no idea that the groom they were currently praising was the same bleeding soldier I had pulled from the burning wreckage of a Middle Eastern war zone. I adjusted my collar. I did not retreat. Before I tell you what happened, please take a moment to like and subscribe to the channel. But only if this story resonates with you. And let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is where you are. It started 3 weeks earlier on a dead silent night at the base. 2 a.m. I sat at my metal desk inside the command office scrolling through drone surveillance footage on a classified monitor. The fluorescent tubes above me buzzed with that flat white hum that turns everything into a morgue. A cold mug of stale coffee sat untouched by my elbow. The night clerk knocked twice, pushed open the steel door, and slid a crisp white envelope across my desk without a word. I picked it up. The paper was thick, expensive, gold-embossed edges. Chloe's wedding invitation. I flipped it open, and the name on the groom's line punched the air out of my lungs. Captain Marcus Hayes. The same Marcus Hayes I had carried on my broken shoulder through 6 miles of enemy territory. The same man whose blood had dried under my fingernails in a Syrian basin. I stared at the elegant calligraphy for a long time. My name was nowhere on the formal guest list. Instead, a yellow sticky note had been slapped over the inside flap with my father's harsh, jagged handwriting. Come back and try to act like a human being. No rank, no title, no dear Diana. Just a command from a man who hadn't dialed my number in a decade, summoning me back like a dog that had wandered too far from the yard. He didn't want a daughter at that wedding. He wanted a prop to prove his family wasn't fractured. I traced my finger over his crude handwriting. The texture of the ink was rough, pressed hard into the paper the way he pressed hard into everything. The muscle memory hit before I could stop it. I was 9 years old again, standing outside the locked door of his walnut-paneled study. He was hosting his country club partners for cigars and brandy. I had knocked because I wanted to show him a perfect score on my math test. The lock clicked. The door cracked open 3 inches, and his face appeared flushed with bourbon. He looked down at the crumpled test paper in my small hand, and his lip curled. He grabbed the door frame and leaned down until I could smell the tobacco on his breath. Not now, Diana. You're not presentable. The door shut. The deadbolt turned. I stood in that dark hallway for 20 minutes holding that test paper, listening to the men inside laughing about stock prices. I ate dinner alone in the kitchen that night. Cold chicken on a paper plate. The housekeeper had already gone home. I was 9. I closed my eyes at my desk, taking a slow, measured, tactical breath. 4 seconds in. Hold! 4 seconds out. His voice echoed in my skull, layered now across dozens of identical memories. Birthday parties I wasn't invited to because I was too rough for the other girls. School plays where every seat in the family row sat empty. The Thanksgiving when I was 14, and he told his guests I was the cleaning lady's daughter because he was ashamed of my second-hand clothes. I was a gritty, tomboyish kid in a house that only valued porcelain dolls. The Christmas when I was 16, he bought Chloe a brand new convertible with a red bow on the hood. He handed me a plain white envelope with $200 in cash and a note that said, "Buy yourself something appropriate." I used the money to buy a pair of steel-toed work boots and a bus ticket to the Army recruiting office the day I turned 17. He signed the parental consent form without reading it. He didn't ask where I was going. He just signed his name and went back to his newspaper. The ghost of his voice repeated the same sentence in 100 different ways across 100 different rooms. Genetic mistake. I tossed the invitation straight into the metal trash bin. The heavy paper clanged against the steel. The heavy oak door of my office swung open. General Sterling stepped in his boots, thudding against the linoleum. He was a tall man with a jaw that looked like it had been carved from the side of a mountain and eyes that missed absolutely nothing. He noticed the gold-embossed card peeking out of the trash. He reached down and pulled it out, reading the sticky note. His jaw tightened. "You're not going to run forever, are you, Diana?" He said, his voice a low, commanding rumble. I kept my eyes on my monitor. "I don't belong in their world, sir." He slammed the invitation back onto my keyboard. The keys clattered. "You've faced the most brutal enemies on this planet. Don't let your own blood rob you of your right to hold your head high." He tapped the invitation with his thick index finger. "Go handle your perimeter." I looked up at him. His eyes held no pity, only the same hard expectation he gave before every mission briefing. He nodded once and walked out, pulling the door shut behind him. I sat there for a full minute staring at the invitation on my keyboard. Then I stood up, rendering a sharp salute to the empty room. I walked back to the barracks and pulled my faded olive drab duffel bag from under the metal cot. I didn't pack civilian dresses. I didn't pack heels or jewelry or anything that would make Arthur Miller comfortable. I packed my combat boots, my service ribbons, and my army dress uniform. The brass buttons clinked together inside the heavy canvas. I zipped the bag shut, the metallic sound sharp in the quiet room. I slung it over my shoulder, feeling the familiar weight settle against my spine. I was returning to the Miller estate, not as a broken child, as a commander. The commercial airliner rattled through a pocket of turbulence, and I gripped the armrest with my left hand, my knuckles whitening against the cheap plastic. The hum of the jet engines filled the cabin like a low, constant growl. I closed my eyes. The sound shifted. The hum deepened into the deafening roar of a Black Hawk helicopter, and suddenly I was back in the Syrian basin 2 years earlier, sitting in the belly of an armored convoy rolling through a dust-choked valley. The IED detonated without warning. The shockwave hit like a freight train, slamming me sideways against the interior plating. I heard my collarbone snap before I felt it. A white flash of pain ripped through my left shoulder, and my vision blurred. Dust and smoke poured through the cracked hull. The radio crackled with raw, desperate screaming. Through the ringing in my ears, I heard the report. A young Lieutenant Marcus Hayes was pinned beneath a burning transport truck 200 yards ahead. Enemy fire was pouring down from the ridge. I kicked open the rear hatch with my boot. The blistering heat of the desert sun hit my face like an open furnace. The air tasted like sulfur and burning rubber. I could see the overturned truck, black smoke boiling from the engine block flames, licking along the undercarriage toward the ruptured fuel tank. Marcus was somewhere underneath that wreckage. I grabbed my rifle with my good arm, my broken collarbone grinding with every step, and sprinted through the crossfire. Rounds snapped past my head, kicking up plumes of sand. I didn't stop. I dove into the blast crater beside the truck. Marcus was on his back, his legs trapped under a twisted steel beam. Blood soaked the sand beneath him, dark and spreading fast. His face was gray, his lips cracked, his eyes rolling with shock. The fuel tank hissed above us, leaking a thin stream of gasoline that was already pooling near the flames. I holstered my weapon and dropped to my knees. I used my bare hands to dig through the rubble, smelling of gunpowder, to drag him out from the scythe of death. My fingernails tore against the jagged metal. Blood from my shredded fingers mixed with the desert sand, turning it into a dark paste. I grabbed the steel beam with both hands, my broken collarbone screaming, and lifted. The beam shifted 3 inches. Enough. I hooked my good arm under Marcus's vest and pulled him free just as the fuel tank behind us ignited with a low, hungry whomp. The heat waves singed the back of my neck. "I've got you," I grunted, hauling his limp body over my good shoulder. He weighed 190 pounds. My collarbone was fractured in 2 places. The extraction point had been overrun. We had to move on foot. I carried Marcus for 6 miles through hostile territory in the dead of night. The terrain was a nightmare of shallow wadis and exposed ridgelines. Every step sent a bolt of white-hot pain from my shoulder down to my fingertips. The desert floor was littered with rocks and scrub brush that tore at my boots. He drifted in and out of consciousness, his head lolling against my back. Twice, he tried to speak, his voice a wet rasp. "Leave me, Colonel. I'm slowing you down." I didn't answer. I kept my hand pressed against the wound in his chest, feeling his heartbeat pulse against my palm. Weak, but steady. I counted each beat like a metronome, using it to time my steps. 1 pulse, 1 step. 1 pulse, 1 step. 6 miles. Somewhere around mile 4, Marcus stopped apologizing. His hand gripped the back of my vest with whatever strength he had left, and he held on. That grip was the only thing keeping me moving. Not for my sake, for his. Because if he was still holding on, he was still alive. When the medevac finally reached us at the secondary extraction point, I collapsed onto my knees in the sand. The medics pried Marcus off my shoulder and loaded him onto the stretcher. His hand grabbed my wrist as they lifted him. His grip was weak, but his eyes were clear. He didn't say thank you. He didn't need to. He just squeezed, and I squeezed back. That was the language of people who had bled together. Words were for civilians. Marcus was promoted to captain 3 months later. He never forgot. He sent me a letter every month written by hand on plain white paper, updating me on his recovery, his physical therapy, his return to duty. I kept every single letter in a locked drawer at the base. They were the only mail I'd ever received that didn't come attached to an insult. The airplane's landing gear slammed onto the tarmac with a heavy jolt, and my eyes snapped open. My left hand was still gripping the armrest. A dull ache pulsed through my healed collarbone, the old fracture responding to the sudden impact like a ghost reminding me it was still there. The memory faded, but the clarity it left behind was ice cold. Marcus was alive because I refused to leave a man behind. My family had left me behind the day I was born. I reached up and pulled my worn duffel bag from the overhead bin, my posture rigid, my jaw set. I stepped off the plane into the biting autumn air of my hometown. I was completely alone, but I was armed. I parked the cheap rental car at the end of the sprawling gravel driveway. The engine ticked as it cooled. The Miller estate loomed ahead, a 3-story colonial mansion, sitting on 4 acres of manicured land like a monument to everything my father worshipped. Perfectly trimmed hedges shaped into geometric patterns. A marble fountain with a bronze eagle spouting water from its beak. 4 luxury sedans lined the circular entrance, their polished bodies gleaming under the porch lights. The entire property screamed money and control. I grabbed my worn duffel bag from the back seat and walked up the grand stone steps. I didn't knock like a guest. I pressed the heavy brass doorbell once and stood at parade rest, my hands clasped firmly behind my back, my spine locked straight my chin level with the horizon. The chime echoed inside the house. Footsteps approached. The heavy oak door swung open. My father, Arthur Miller, stood in the doorway wearing a tailored, bespoke suit that probably cost more than my annual housing allowance. He hadn't aged a day. His face was still a mask of rigid authority and absolute vanity. Silver hair slicked back with precision. A gold watch catching the porch light. His eyes darted down to my scuffed combat boots, crawled up over my faded cargo pants and plain black jacket, and settled on my unstyled hair pulled into a tight regulation bun. His upper lip curled into a sneer of pure contempt, slow and deliberate, the way a man looks at something stuck to the bottom of his shoe. "I thought you died in some ditch by now," he said. 10 years of silence between us, and those were his first words, delivered with the casual cruelty of a man signing a termination letter. I didn't flinch. My heart rate held steady. I looked directly into his eyes, projecting the cold authority I used when addressing hostile combatants across an interrogation table. "Sorry to disappoint you, Father," I replied. My voice was completely flat, no tremor, no emotion, just fact. His jaw tightened. The muscles in his neck corded. My total lack of reaction visibly infuriated him. He had expected tears. He had expected the broken little girl. He remembered the one who ate cold chicken alone in the kitchen. Instead, I stood in his doorway like a wall of reinforced concrete. He didn't offer a hug. He didn't extend a handshake. He jerked his chin toward the interior hallway, a sharp, dismissive gesture, and turned his back. He led me through the grand foyer, past the sweeping mahogany staircase, past the formal living room with its crystal chandeliers and imported Italian furniture. I cataloged every detail with the trained eye of an intelligence officer on a reconnaissance sweep. On the wall above the fireplace hung a massive oil portrait of Arthur and Chloe, painted in golden light, both of them smiling with manufactured warmth. To the right, a glass trophy case displayed Chloe's pageant crowns, her sorority awards, her framed magazine features. Every shelf was full, every surface was polished. I scanned the entire wall, every frame, every photograph, every certificate. There was nothing of me, not a single photo, not a mention, not even a blank space where something had been removed. I had simply never existed in this house. My father marched me down the narrow, unlit hallway at the back of the house. The polished hardwood transitioned to scuffed linoleum. The air changed from expensive mahogany and citrus cleaner to the damp smell of old plaster. He stopped at the last door on the left, the tiny cramped room normally reserved for the cleaning staff. A bare bulb hung from the ceiling. A narrow metal cot with a thin mattress sat against the wall. No window, no mirror, no closet. He shoved the door open with the flat of his palm. A cockroach skittered across the linoleum and disappeared under the cot. The rehearsal dinner is tomorrow. Don't wear these rags and humiliate me. He ordered, his voice carrying the same tone he used to instruct the household staff. He paused in the doorway and turned back, his eyes sweeping over my duffel bag. And if anyone asks, you work in logistics, filing, nothing more. He slammed the door shut without another word. His footsteps retreated down the hallway, growing fainter until the distant sound of the living room door closing sealed me off from the rest of the house. I dropped my heavy bag onto the creaking cot. The springs groaned under the weight. I stood in the center of the room and slowly rotated, assessing the exits. One door, no window. A ventilation grate near the ceiling, 6 inches wide. The walls were thin enough to hear the muffled laughter of a television from somewhere deeper in the house. Chloe's laughter, high and careless. I sat on the edge of the cot and unlaced my boots. I placed them side by side on the floor, toes pointing toward the door. Old habit, ready to move in under 4 seconds. I lay back on the thin mattress and stared at the bare bulb above me. The light hummed faintly, a sound I knew from 1,000 forward operating bases. Familiar, cold, mine. I arrived at the upscale restaurant the next evening at exactly 7. The valet looked at my rental car like it was a health code violation parked between the Bentleys and Mercedes. I walked past him without a word and pushed through the heavy glass doors into the dining room. Crystal chandeliers dripped light across white linen tablecloths. The air was thick with the suffocating smell of expensive perfume and seared wagyu. Waiters in black vests glided between tables carrying silver trays of appetizers that cost more than a private's weekly pay. I scanned the room the way I scanned every room. Exits first. Kitchen door to the left, swinging on brass hinges. Main entrance behind me. Emergency exit at the far wall, partially blocked by a massive floral arrangement. Then I scanned for my seat. The family was arranged at a long elevated table at the center of the restaurant. My father sat at the head. Chloe sat at his right, draped in a white silk dress and a diamond necklace that glittered like a chandelier of its own. Marcus sat across from her, his shoulders slightly hunched, his eyes scanning the room with the quiet alertness of a man who had spent too long watching for threats in places that looked peaceful. My place card was not at the family table. I found it shoved onto a wobbly two-top table crammed against the swinging kitchen doors, right where the waiters burst through every 40 seconds carrying hot plates. The card read, E. Miller, in messy rushed ink. No first name, no title, no rank. Just the wrong initial. I pulled out the chair, sat down with my spine pressed flat against the wood, and folded my hands on the table. Every time the kitchen door swung open behind me, a blast of hot, greasy air hit the back of my neck. I watched the family table through the crowd, tracking movement and conversation like a surveillance feed. Chloe made her grand entrance to the center of the room 20 minutes later, parading between the tables with her bridesmaids trailing behind her like a royal procession. The diamonds around her neck probably cost more than an armored vehicle. She stopped to receive compliments from every table, touching people's arms with practiced camera-ready affection. When she passed my table by the kitchen, one of her bridesmaids, a tall blonde in a red dress, leaned over and pointed at me. She whispered something behind her manicured hand. Chloe rolled her eyes, not even bothering to lower her voice. "Oh, please, she's just a lowly clerk guarding some boring warehouses. Don't pay her any mind." She flicked her wrist dismissively and kept walking. The bridesmaids erupted into high-pitched giggles, their laughter cutting through the ambient noise like breaking glass. I picked up my water glass and took a slow, measured sip. The water was lukewarm. I set the glass back down and kept my eyes forward. The main course arrived. A plate of rare steak blood pooling around the edges with a sprig of wilted rosemary that looked like it had been thrown on as an afterthought. The VIP table received their plates with ceremony, each dish presented under a silver cloche that the waiters lifted simultaneously. My plate was slid in front of me by a passing busboy who didn't make eye contact. I picked up my knife and fork and began cutting the rare meat into perfect, identical squares. Each cut was precise, controlled, the blade moving with surgical accuracy. I ate in silence, chewing slowly, watching the room. At the adjacent table, an older gentleman in a dark suit had been watching me for the better part of 20 minutes. He sat upright, his posture rigid, his silver hair cropped in a close military cut that hadn't changed style in 40 years. A small pin on his lapel caught the light. An old unit insignia, 3rd Infantry Division. His hands were weathered, the knuckles thick and scarred from decades of service. He leaned toward me, his voice low and respectful, the voice of a man who recognized rank even when it wasn't displayed. "Miss, you have the bearing of a soldier. The way you sit, the way you hold your utensils, the way you scan exits." He paused, studying the faint scar visible on my left hand where my fingernails had been torn away in Syria. "Did you serve in the recent campaign at—" Before I could answer, a heavy hand slammed down onto my table from behind, rattling my silverware. My steak knife jumped. My father materialized at my shoulder, his chest puffed, his face flushed from 3 glasses of Cabernet. He glared at the older gentleman, Major Davis, with a booming fake laugh that carried across half the restaurant. "Old friend, what does this brat know about campaigns? She is the biggest disappointment of my life." My father clapped Major Davis on the shoulder with excessive force, steering the conversation away from me with the brute confidence of a man used to controlling every room he entered. Major Davis frowned. His eyes darted between my father's aggressive posture and my face, which had not moved a single muscle. The major slowly pulled back, lowering his gaze to his plate. But I caught it. The flicker of doubt in his eyes. The quiet recognition that something about Arthur Miller's story did not add up. I looked up at my father and gave him a single freezing smile. I picked up my steak knife and resumed cutting. The morning of the wedding, I stood in front of the cracked mirror in the servants' quarters. The bare bulb above cast a hard yellow light across my reflection. I reached into my duffel bag and pulled out my army dress uniform, still sealed in its plastic garment cover. I peeled the cover off slowly, the plastic crackling in the silence. The dark green fabric was pressed and immaculate. I had maintained this uniform the same way I maintained my weapons, with absolute precision and zero tolerance for imperfection. I pulled on the fitted jacket, buttoning each brass button from bottom to top. Each one had been polished to a mirror shine the night before, using a torn strip of undershirt and a dab of brass cleaner I kept in a tin at the bottom of my bag. I pinned my colonel rank insignia to my shoulders, pressing the metal clasps until they locked with a quiet click. Then I opened the small velvet case that held my combat ribbons and medals. The Bronze Star, the Purple Heart, the Combat Action Badge, the Army Commendation Medal. I aligned each one on my chest with millimeter precision, using 2 fingers to measure the spacing the way I had been taught at West Point. This uniform was not fabric. It was woven with the blood of my brothers and sisters in arms. Every ribbon represented a mission, completed a life, saved a sacrifice made in silence while my family drank champagne and pretended I didn't exist. I secured my hair into a tight regulation bun, pulling each strand flat against my skull. I laced my polished black dress shoes, double knotting them with the same deliberate knot I had tied before every combat deployment. I looked at my reflection one final time. The woman staring back at me had hard eyes, a locked jaw, and the posture of someone who had been through enough fire to stop flinching at the heat. I was going to war. I walked into the Grand Cathedral 30 minutes before the ceremony. My combat boots struck the marble floor with a heavy, deliberate rhythm that echoed up into the vaulted stone ceiling. Heads turned in the pews. Whispers rippled through the assembled guests like a wave. The tailored suits and silk dresses shifted uncomfortably as they tried to process the sight of a full military dress uniform walking down the center aisle of a society wedding. I kept my eyes forward, my stride measured my shoulders, squared. The ambush came from behind a massive arrangement of white lilies and roses. My father lunged out from the alcove beside the vestibule, his face purple with rage, the veins in his neck bulging against his starched collar. He grabbed my bicep with both hands, his manicured fingernails digging painfully into the muscle through the thick fabric, and shoved me forcefully into the dark stone alcove. The smell of burning church candles and lily pollen mixed with a sharp stink of expensive scotch on his breath. "What the hell kind of joke is this? Are you trying to ruin your sister's wedding in that damn suit?" he snarled. His face was inches from mine. His pupils were dilated. His grip tightened until I could feel the individual pressure of each fingertip through my sleeve. I looked down at his hand gripping my arm. I didn't pull away. I didn't raise my voice. I simply flexed my bicep, the muscle hardening like a steel cable underneath the fabric. His fingers, soft from decades of boardroom handshakes and country club dinners, slipped against the resistance. I grabbed his wrist with one hand and peeled his grip off my uniform with terrifying ease, the way you remove a child's hand from a hot stove. He stumbled backward half a step, his eyes widening with brief instinctual fear. In that fraction of a second, his body registered what his brain refused to accept. I could break his arm without raising my heart rate. "This is my honor," I stated. My voice dropped an octave, carrying the absolute weight of a battlefield command. I released his wrist and stepped past him into the nave. His face contorted. He scrambled to adjust his tie, smoothing down his jacket with trembling hands, reassembling his mask of control. "You will sit in the absolute back," he seethed through clenched teeth, jabbing his finger toward the rear of the cathedral. During the ceremony, the pastor called the immediate family up to the altar to receive the traditional blessing. My mother had died when I was 12. It should have been my father, Chloe, and me standing before that altar. I stood up from the last pew and stepped into the aisle. My father moved fast. He stepped directly into my path, blocking the aisle with his body. His hand shot out, palm-flat fingers splayed, pushing the air between us like a wall. He glared at me and pointed a trembling finger toward the shadows of the very last row. His message was absolute. I was not family. I stood down. I lowered myself back into the dark pew. The wooden seat creaked under me. I folded my hands in my lap and watched the blessing from the back of the cathedral alone, as the golden light from the stained glass windows fell on everyone but me. The battle wasn't here, not yet. The reception was held in the country club's grand ballroom. I walked through the arched entrance and into a room designed to make rich people feel like royalty. Crystal chandeliers the size of small cars hung from the coffered ceiling, throwing fractured light across hundreds of guests in evening gowns and tailored tuxedos. A live jazz band played on a raised stage at the far end, the bass thumping low enough to vibrate the floor. Massive floral centerpieces erupted from every VIP table, overflowing with white roses and trailing ivy that cascaded onto the white linen like waterfalls of green silk. The air smelled of expensive perfume, melting butter, and the sweet, cloying scent of vanilla from a 5-tier wedding cake displayed on a marble pedestal. I walked past the VIP tables, past the second tier of seating, past the third. I kept walking until the chandeliers were behind me and the lighting thinned to a dim institutional glow. I found table 12. It was a tiny bare cocktail table shoved directly against the red fire exit door at the very back of the room, partially blocked by a massive structural column that cut me off from the sightline of the main floor. Next to the table, close enough that I could smell it, sat a waist-high black trash receptacle with a swinging lid. The lid had a smear of chocolate icing on the edge from a discarded dessert plate. This was my father's ultimate statement. He had placed his eldest daughter at the garbage. I sat down. I squared my shoulders, pressed my spine against the cold metal chair, and locked my eyes on the head table 60 yards away, where Chloe sat in her white gown, Marcus beside her in his tuxedo, and my father presiding over the room like a king surveying his kingdom. A young waiter in a white jacket approached the VIP section, pouring vintage champagne into crystal flutes with practiced elegance. The golden liquid caught the chandelier light. He made his rounds through the second and third tiers, refilling glasses, smiling, nodding. Then he reached my dark corner. His smile faded. He set down a clear plastic cup on my bare table and poured tap water from a metal pitcher. The condensation dripped immediately down the cheap plastic pooling on the table surface. The waiter wouldn't meet my eyes. His hands trembled slightly as he poured. "Mr. Miller requested no alcohol be served to you." The waiter muttered, his face flushing a deep, painful red. His voice cracked on the last word. He stood there for a moment, trapped between my father's orders and the obvious wrong of what he was doing. I could see it in the way his jaw worked, the way his eyes darted to the crystal flutes on the tray he was carrying, and then back to the plastic cup he had just placed in front of a decorated military officer. I nodded once, releasing him from his misery. "Understood," I said quietly. He turned and practically fled back toward the bar. I took a sip of the lukewarm water. It tasted flat and metallic, like it had been sitting in the pitcher since the kitchen prep started hours ago. Across the room, crystal glasses clinked. Laughter erupted from the VIP table. My father raised his champagne flute in a toast, his voice booming across the ballroom, praising his beautiful daughter, his brilliant son-in-law, and the glorious future of the Miller dynasty. He didn't mention my name. I didn't expect him to. The band stopped playing. The room quieted. Chloe stood up from the head table, her diamonds catching the spotlight that swung onto her from above. She tapped her silver spoon against her crystal champagne flute, the clear ringing note slicing through the murmur of 200 guests. She smiled, dabbed a practiced, elegant tear from the corner of her eye with a lace handkerchief, and launched into a long saccharine speech about how her father was the greatest man she had ever known. How he had sacrificed everything for his family. How his love and support had shaped her into the woman she was today. Then she paused. Her eyes scanned the room, slowly sweeping across the tables with theatrical precision until they locked onto my shadowy corner behind the column. Her lips curled into a sneer that the spotlight caught perfectly. "Today our family has a special guest from far away," she announced into the microphone, her voice dripping with honeyed venom. "My sister, who always runs from family responsibilities to chase frivolous nonsense." She raised her glass toward the shadows. "Let's raise a glass to our great security guard." The room erupted into cruel, echoing laughter. 200 voices bouncing off the vaulted ceiling, amplified by the acoustics of the ballroom until it sounded like 1,000. Faces turned toward my corner, squinting through the dim light, amused smirks, stretching across powdered cheeks and clean-shaven jaws. The laughter rolled and rolled. I didn't look away. I didn't blink. I didn't break eye contact with my sister. My face remained a mask of carved granite. In my lap beneath the table, my hands rested completely still, palms flat on my thighs, fingers relaxed. I was a sniper behind the scope. My breath controlled my pulse, steady, waiting for the target to walk perfectly into the crosshairs. The laughter began to die down, but the air in the ballroom felt thick and suffocating, heavy with the kind of silence that comes right before the detonation. Sitting alone while your own blood publicly mocks your existence is a deep, suffocating wound that I know many of you carry. Please like this video and share your own experiences in the comments, because no one should have to face the cruelty of toxic family dynamics alone. My father couldn't resist. The champagne in his own swollen ego had eroded the last traces of his self-control. He snatched the microphone from Chloe's hand before she could sit down, nearly yanking the cord out of the speaker. He rose from his chair, swaying slightly, his face slick with perspiration beneath the hot spotlight. He planted his feet wide, puffed out his chest, and pointed a trembling, accusatory finger straight across the ballroom at me. "You are the disgrace of this family, Diana." He bellowed, his voice echoing off the vaulted ceilings with the amplified force of the sound system. Every conversation in the room died instantly. 200 faces froze. Forks stopped mid-air. Glasses paused at lips. The only sound was the low hum of the speakers and my father's heavy, labored breathing. I put you in that corner so you wouldn't pollute the eyes of my daughter's esteemed guests. He continued, his voice rising, his finger still jabbing the air in my direction. Veins bulged across his forehead. His eyes were glassy and bloodshot. Your very existence in that hideous green suit makes me sick. The silence in the room became violently awkward. Guests shifted in their chairs, eyes dropped to tablecloths. A woman at the VIP table covered her mouth with her napkin. The band members on stage exchanged uncomfortable glances. My father stood in the center of the spotlight, breathing hard, his face twisted into a mask of pure, undiluted contempt, apparently expecting the room to applaud his boldness. I slowly pushed my chair back. The metal legs scraped against the hardwood floor, cutting through the silence with a sound like tearing fabric. I stood up. I straightened my jacket. I adjusted the metals on my chest with 2 precise movements. But before I could take a single step forward, a heavy crash erupted from the head table. Every head in the room snapped toward the sound. Captain Marcus Hayes had slammed both fists onto the polished wood with enough force to overturn his champagne glass, sending a spray of vintage champagne across the white linen. He stared at me across the ballroom, his eyes wide, the color draining completely from his face. His mouth opened, then closed. His jaw muscles clenched so hard I could see them flex from 60 yards away. He recognized me. In that uniform with those medals standing at full height in the cold light, he saw me for exactly who I was. Not the invisible sister, not the security guard. He saw the colonel who had pulled him from a burning truck in Syria and carried him through 6 miles of hell. Marcus vaulted over the head table. His hip caught a crystal vase and sent it shattering across the hardwood. White roses scattered across the floor like dropped grenades. He shoved past the floral arrangements, knocked a chair sideways, and ignored Chloe, who screamed his name and clutched at his tuxedo sleeve. He tore free from her grip without looking back. He sprinted across the ballroom. 200 guests watched in stunned silence as the groom abandoned his own wedding reception and ran toward the woman sitting next to the trash can. His dress shoes hammered the hardwood with rapid, urgent strikes. He crossed the 60 yards in seconds. He stopped precisely 3 feet in front of me. His chest was heaving. His eyes were flooded with tears that spilled freely down his flushed cheeks. He did not wipe them. He snapped his heavy dress shoes together, the sharp crack of leather on hardwood echoing through the ballroom like a gunshot. Every person in the room flinched. Then Marcus Hayes threw his right hand to his brow in a perfect rigid military salute. His fingers trembled, but his arm was locked, straight textbook, the salute of a soldier rendering honors to a superior officer. A woman at the nearest VIP table gasped. A champagne glass slipped from someone's fingers and shattered on the floor. Nobody moved to clean it up. "Colonel, please forgive my family's ignorance." Marcus roared, his voice breaking with sheer outrage and emotion. The words hit the ballroom like a concussion wave. He held the salute, his entire body shaking. Then he spun on his heel to face my father. Arthur Miller stood frozen at the head table, the microphone still dangling from his limp hand, his mouth hanging open. "Do you people know who you are insulting?" Marcus shouted, his voice raw, his finger pointing at my father with the same accusatory force my father had aimed at me moments ago. "This is Colonel Diana Miller, Special Operations Commander. She's no security guard." Marcus stepped toward my father, his shoes crunching over the broken crystal from the shattered vase. His face was contorted with a rage that I recognized. It was the rage of a soldier watching a comrade be dishonored. He closed the distance until he was 6 feet from Arthur Miller's frozen face. "She is the hero who ran into a sea of fire in the Middle East and carried me on her back for 6 miles to save me from death." Marcus's voice cracked on the word, death. Tears were streaming down his jaw, dripping onto the collar of his white tuxedo shirt. Without her, there would be no wedding today. The words detonated across the ballroom. My father's jaw dropped. The color drained from his face so completely, he looked like a corpse standing upright in a tailored suit. The microphone slipped from his sweaty fingers and crashed onto the hardwood floor with an ear-splitting screech of feedback that made half the room clap their hands over their ears. Chloe collapsed backward into her chair at the head table, her hands flying up to cover her mouth, her diamond necklace swinging against her heaving chest. Her eyes were wide, unblinking, staring at me as if she was seeing me for the first time in her entire life. The entire ballroom held its breath. Major Davis, the retired veteran from the rehearsal dinner who had recognized my bearing, was the first to move. He pushed his chair back from his table with a deliberate, measured force. The chair legs barked against the hardwood. He tossed his linen napkin onto the table, squared his shoulders, pulled his spine straight, and snapped a crisp military salute directly at me. His eyes locked onto mine with absolute clarity. He held the salute with the steadiness of a man who had rendered honors 1,000 times before. Within seconds, a domino effect ripped through the room. At the table behind the major, a broad-shouldered man in a dark gray suit stood up and saluted. Then a woman, 3 tables over, her silver hair pinned beneath a small hat, rose from her seat and placed her hand over her heart. 5, then 10, then 20. Men and women scattered throughout the ballroom stood up one by one, some rendering full military salutes, others pressing their palms flat against their chests. Investors, politicians, retired officers, hidden veterans who had buried their service beneath civilian suits for the evening. They stood. They recognized the uniform. They recognized the medals. They recognized what my father had tried to bury at a table next to a trash can. The journalists my father had hired to photograph his perfect family event saw what was happening. Camera flashes erupted across the room like white lightning. Shutter clicks rattled in rapid bursts. The photographers pushed forward through the table's lenses, aimed not at the bride, not at the cake, not at the glittering decorations, but at the standing veterans and the colonel in the green uniform at the back of the room. They were witnessing the destruction of the Miller legacy in real time, and every single one of them knew it. Panic seized my father's eyes. The blood drained from his face and then flooded back in a mottled crimson rush. He saw his corporate empire evaporating in real time. Every camera flash was a headline. Every salute was a shareholder pulling out. He stumbled across the ballroom floor, weaving between tables, bumping chairs, his polished shoes slipping on the scattered rose petals from the shattered centerpiece. He reached me and desperately grabbed my hand with both of his, plastering a horrifying, trembling smile on his face for the cameras. His palms were slick with sweat. His cologne couldn't mask the sharp, acrid smell of fear pouring from his skin. "Diana, daughter, I didn't know." He stammered, his voice high and thin, stripped of every ounce of the booming authority he had wielded minutes ago. His eyes darted between my face and the camera lenses surrounding us. "It's just a misunderstanding. Listen, just smile, tell them I've always been proud of you. To protect our family's reputation, please." I ripped my hand out of his grip. His fingers scraped against my knuckles as I pulled free. I looked down at him. He was shorter than me. I had never noticed that before. Or maybe I had always been looking up at him the way a child looks up at a giant. He wasn't a giant. He was a small, terrified man in a suit that cost more than his character was worth. I didn't look at him with anger. Anger required investment. I looked at him with absolute freezing disgust, the same expression I used when examining the wreckage of a failed enemy position. "You have permanently lost the right to use the word family with me." I stated clearly, my voice calm level, and pitched exactly loud enough for every journalist's recorder to capture each syllable. The cameras flashed, the shutters clicked. "The soldiers out there call me Commander," I said, lifting my chin toward the standing veterans still holding their salutes across the ballroom. I stepped closer to my father, close enough to see the individual beads of sweat crawling down his temples. I dropped my voice to a register that only he could hear, low enough to cut through the noise, cold enough to freeze the blood in his veins. "To me, from this moment on, you are a stranger with the poorest character I have ever known." His face collapsed. Every muscle in his jaw, his cheeks, his forehead sagged simultaneously as if the invisible strings holding his mask in place had been cut all at once. His mouth opened, but nothing came out. His hands dropped to his sides, limp and useless. I stepped back. I adjusted my cuffs with 2 precise movements, pulling each sleeve exactly 1/4 inch past the jacket hem. I looked at him one final time. "Your acting career is over." I turned my back on Arthur Miller. I walked down the center aisle of the ballroom, my combat boots striking the hardwood in a slow, measured cadence. The standing veterans lined my path like an honor guard, their salutes holding firm as I passed. Camera flashes popped and crackled from every angle. I didn't look back at Chloe sobbing at the head table, her mascara running in black streaks down her cheeks. Her bridesmaids frozen in their chairs with their mouths hanging open. I didn't look back at my father, who dropped to his knees on the hardwood floor as the pack of reporters closed in around him, their microphones and recorders thrust forward like weapons. Marcus stepped back to my side. He didn't touch me. He simply stood there at attention, his salute still rigid, his jaw clenched so tight the tendons stood out against his neck. He had chosen. Between his new wife's family and the officer who had carried him out of a furnace, he had chosen without hesitation. I pushed open the heavy mahogany doors of the country club with both hands. The doors swung wide and the cool, silent night rushed in against my face. I stepped outside. The door closed behind me with a solid final thud. The muffled chaos of the ballroom faded into the darkness. I stood on the stone steps. The sky above was clear and black and full of stars. I took a deep breath of cold air and held it in my lungs for 4 seconds. I exhaled slowly. My hands hung at my sides loose and still for the first time in 3 days. I returned to base the next morning and went straight to General Sterling's office. He was standing behind his desk when I walked in, his arms folded across his chest, a faint trace of something that might have been a smile pulling at the corner of his mouth. His computer screen was open to a newsfeed. The footage from the wedding had already gone viral. Every major veterans organization, every military support network, and half the cable news channels had picked up the story. The headline on the screen read, "Corporate Titan Publicly Humiliates Decorated War Hero Daughter at Family Wedding." The video clip of Marcus saluting me at the trash can table had been viewed over 4 million times in 12 hours. The fallout was swift and merciless. The veteran community mobilized within days. Boycotts against Arthur Miller's corporation spread across social media like wildfire. His largest government defense contracts, the ones that required public trust and military endorsement, were frozen pending review. Shareholders dumped stock in panicked waves. Within 3 weeks, the Miller Group's market capitalization had collapsed by 60%. Financial analysts called it the fastest reputation-driven bankruptcy in corporate history. Board members resigned in clusters, issuing public statements distancing themselves from Arthur Miller's personal conduct. The corner office he had worshipped his entire life was emptied. Movers carried out his mahogany desk, his oil portraits, his crystal decanters, while security stood in the lobby. His name, once displayed in polished brass letters 3 feet tall above the entrance, was pried off the facade and replaced with a blank concrete patch that stared out at the street like a missing tooth. Chloe's marriage to Marcus became a living nightmare of her own making. Marcus refused to forgive her cruelty toward me. He filed for legal separation within 2 weeks of the wedding, moved on to the base, and requested a transfer to a unit 3 states away. Chloe was left alone in the Miller estate, surrounded by empty rooms, fading flowers from a ruined wedding, and a diamond necklace that no longer impressed anyone. The golden child discovered that gold tarnishes when the man paying for it goes bankrupt. I didn't let the momentum die. I didn't celebrate. I didn't give interviews. I worked. Using my accumulated military pay, my modest investment portfolio that I had built discipline by discipline over 20 years of service, and the financial backing of General Sterling and a coalition of retired senior officers, I launched the Sentinel Foundation. We built a legal and psychological task force dedicated solely to protecting active duty soldiers and veterans from financial abuse, identity theft, and psychological manipulation by toxic family members. I hired 3 attorneys who specialized in military family law, 2 forensic accountants, and a team of trauma counselors who understood the specific intersection of combat stress and domestic betrayal. We established a hotline. We created a legal defense fund. We built a safe network for soldiers who were being bled dry by the same people who were supposed to be their home. I weaponized my own trauma. I turned the pain of being banished to a table next to a trash can into a shield for every soldier who had ever been treated the same way by their own blood. No soldier under the Sentinel Foundation's watch would ever be shamed into silence by a family that treated them like a burden. Not while I was breathing. After securing the foundation's first year of funding and hiring the core team, I sat at my metal desk in the command office one last time. The fluorescent light buzzed above me with the same flat white hum it had been producing for 20 years. I opened my bottom drawer and pulled out the stack of blank paperwork I had been carrying for months. Honorable discharge papers. I filled in each field with a black pen, my handwriting precise and steady. Name, rank, service number, years of active duty, 20 years. 2 decades in the uniform that had saved my life, given me purpose, taught me the only family that never betrayed me. I stood up and walked the paperwork down the hall to General Sterling's office. He took the papers from my hand without a word. He read them slowly, his eyes moving across each line. When he finished, he set the papers on his desk, stood up, and extended his hand. I shook it. His grip was firm and warm. He gave me a proud, silent nod. No speech, no ceremony. Just the quiet understanding of 2 soldiers who had said everything that needed to be said a long time ago. I packed my duffel bag for the final time. The brass buttons of my dress uniform clinked together inside the heavy canvas as I folded the jacket with careful precision, pressing each crease flat with my palm. I zipped the bag shut. The metallic sound was sharp in the quiet barracks, the same sound that had started this journey 3 weeks ago. I slung the bag over my shoulder. I bought a small rugged wooden house on a quiet stretch of coastline 300 miles from the Miller estate. The real estate agent called it a fixer-upper. I called it mine. The porch faced east, overlooking a rocky beach where the waves broke in steady rhythmic sets against the dark sand. The nearest neighbor was half a mile down the road. The silence was enormous. This morning, I stood on my back porch holding a mug of black coffee. The bitter, dark taste sat heavy on my tongue. The wind whipped sea salt against my face, stinging the faint scars on my knuckles where my fingernails had been torn away in Syria. My phone sat on the kitchen counter inside, silent. It didn't ring with demands. There were no fake smiles to perform, no manipulation to decode, no family portrait to be erased from. I watched the sun break over the horizon, casting a warm golden light across the water and onto my scarred hands wrapped around the ceramic mug. The warmth spread across my face. My closed eyes, the old fracture line in my collarbone that still ached on cold mornings. I took a deep breath of the ocean air and let it fill my lungs completely. Salt and cold and freedom. I was free. Walking away from toxic bloodlines isn't a failure, it is the ultimate victory for your own peace of mind. Please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your own stories of breaking free in the comments below.